Great. So I'll go ahead. Hello, everyone. My name is, as Agustin was already introducing, José Luis de Munain. I'm the CEO of the Spanish SNAP. Welcome everyone to this webinar organized by SpainNAB, Spainsif, the Sustainable Investment Forum in Spain, in collaboration with the Global Impact Investing Network, to talk about impact investment in listed markets. So first of all, thank you all. Thank you all participants that took some time to join us to debate about this important topic. Thank you as well, of course, to Spainsif, our sister organization, with whom we've been collaborating for many years now, and one of the pioneer entities, associations to promote sustainable finance here in Spain. And if I may, I'll briefly introduce what is SpainNAB. SpainNAB is the National Advisory Board for Impact Investment here in Spain. It's an association of 45 members, including the main actors in the impact investment space here in Spain. Not only asset managers, of course, but also other institutional investors such as foundations, pension funds, and other financial institutions. We are the representing body of the GSG here in Spain. The GSG is the global the global steering group for impact investment. We are present in 35 countries. We were born in 2013 in the G8, chaired by the father of the impact investment, which is Sir Ronald Cohen. So very briefly, as we all know, impact investment has grown exponentially in the last years. While it started in private equity markets, we see now, it seems that the new frontier is in public markets. However, many questions arise about this feasibility, about whether investing in listed in public markets can have a deep impact, an additional impact. So many of these questions are going to be answered here today, hopefully. And here we are today to analyze the learnings that have been published by the GIIN through an interesting report precisely about how to pursue impact investment, how to pursue impact in listed markets. This is a work, as our colleague Sean will explain, that has been developed for more than 1 year now through a working group in this space. So we are very happy and proud to have the GIIN, to have Sean, to have Spainsif, and of course to have you all here today with us to explore and debate about this very important topic. So thank you so much. And now I give the floor to my colleague, Andrea Gonzalez from Spainsif. Thank you so much.
Thank you, José Luis, and welcome everybody to this joint webinar by Spainsif and SpainNAB. I have to say that after years and years of conversations on how feasible impact investing might be in listed markets, I'm overly happy for us putting together this kind of webinar, for having specific and devoted content from GIIN, and also having these great market players today. As for Spainsif, the Spanish Sustainable Investment Forum, we in present do gather more than 110 multi-stakeholder organizations that operate at a national level. And it's since 2009 that the SIF has been working towards its mission of promoting sustainable finance in Spain, and through our European network, which is USF. We have been collaborating with SpainNAB for quite a number of years already, because we do have many shared goals and also synergies going on. But I have to say that, to me, the most thrilling collaboration those years has had to be on how to escalate impact investing. So even though in publicly traded markets, this is still a very open discussion, here we do have hectic years ahead of us in terms of clarifying and signaling which impact investing solutions are best suited for institutional and retail investors, and also in terms of incorporating all of this into sustainable finance wider regulatory frameworks, which I have to tell, it's a quite challenging task. So today I find this as a great opportunity to get the information from this primary source and discuss around these first impressions on how feasible, how useful, how influential the proposal from GIIN on this guide can turn as a tool, as an inspiration, or ultimately as help for those who might be tackling impact investing in listed equities in their strategy in the future. So without stealing any more time to content, best of luck in all the technical stuff for the next hour and a half. May we have a great webinar, and I will just introduce our keynote, for which we are also very thankful, which is Mr. Song Gilbert, Chief Investor Networking Officer from the Global Impact Investing Network. He has led and keeps on coordinating the Impact and Listed Equities Working Group, if I'm not wrong. So Sean, whenever you feel like, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to join you today and the opportunity to participate in a dialogue. And I'm looking very much forward to hearing as much, I'll be sharing some of the work we've done, but I'm looking very much forward to hearing some of the thoughts of the participants on listed equities and the role they can play in an impact investing landscape. For those who are not familiar with the GIIN, just a word on us. We're an international network organization. We're based in New York, but we have a membership of about 450 members from over 50 countries, and we work with a much wider certain network of investors beyond that. We were established to support the growth of the impact investing industry, both in terms of scale and in terms of effectiveness. And in order to do that, we provide research, we develop public tools to support impact measurement and management, and then we work with the community of practice to try to support collaboration in building the market and developing practices. I am going to move to a presentation now, and I'm going to try to move through this in about 20 minutes. To introduce the work on listed equities. There is a guidance document that is the output of this working group that can be downloaded from our website that will provide the more specific guidance as well as a little bit of additional context. Today, I'll try to share some of the highlights out of that. First, maybe a word in terms of the background on the start of this group. I think from start to finish, we probably spent close to about 2 years working on it, perhaps even a little bit more because we were slowed down by the onset of COVID. But initially at the start of the group, I think there was, to be honest, very much an open question in terms of should one even recognize listed equities as an asset class in which impact investing practices can be applied. And I think by the time we reached the end of it, in many ways, the question shifted away from should we recognize towards how do we describe what would be reasonable expectations, in part because we can see that the market is already moving forward in terms of asset managers putting forward offerings that are described as impact, and there's an active interest in terms of thinking about how to look at real world outcomes in relation to listed equities. So our motivation in terms of this, first and foremost, was to try to help clarify some of the confusion in the marketplace around what impact would mean within this asset class. If it's going to be used as a label, then we should try to help describe what expectations one could reasonably expect with it. From a mission perspective, there were also some reasons it started to become increasingly important in our mind. First and foremost, as we try to think about accessing larger pools of capital and to try to think about what an integrated approach of investing would be for a pension or for an insurance company or an endowment or other types of institutions or even family offices for that matter. If we want then to approach their portfolios and look at impact in an integrated way, then we need something to say about what impact would mean in all of the different asset classes that comprise a portfolio, and particularly for the largest asset classes, which include listed equities and fixed income. In addition, if you think about the need for financing sustainable development investments, There's a lot that will come through capital markets, but there's also a lot that would not be serviced through capital markets and will come through choices that companies make about their own balance sheet resources. So if you think about retrofitting the world's factories for things like energy efficiency, waste minimization, health and safety type investments, those are unlikely to come in the form of project finance or some sort of an instrument that can be provided or addressed through debt or equity. More likely, they're going to come through companies deciding to invest into their own factory facilities. And so ways in which that kind of investment could be facilitated or motivated seem to be also an important way to try to address some of the investment gap that's needed in terms of achieving sustainable development goals. And then lastly, if you think in terms of private markets, the intention of trying to invest into small companies that have innovative ideas and balance sheets, or say innovative ideas and business models, if our aspiration is that these will grow and become an ever larger part of an economy or be able to reach an ever larger part of the community, then as they grow and become larger and move through their stages of life, at some point when they reach the opportunity to go public, you would want them to be able to be matched with investors that value them for the same reasons as the investors that supported them through the earlier stages of their life cycle, in order for them to continue and have the ability to continue pursuing the mission that had gotten to the point of an IPO. And there are plenty of examples of companies that at later stages in their growth cycle perhaps started with an ambitious idea and changed it substantially to try to meet the needs and expectations of later stage growth investors, and then especially those in public markets that often look with a different sort of lens than those that are approaching investments as a multi-year proposition. So all of that led us to wanting to try to develop this guidance to help articulate what a market might expect in terms of transporting the practices that have been tried and trusted and developed over the years and other asset classes into listed equities, recognizing that it's an asset class that's characterized by a much greater degree of diversification, shorter holding periods, the use of benchmarks as a strong reference point by most asset owners in terms of evaluating the quality of investment and other attributes that help differentiate them or create different characteristics. Our compass in all of our work was some work that we did several years ago called the Core Characteristics of Impact Investing that distilled out the first decade of experience that we've observed with the community that we worked with on the things that characterize high quality impact investing and help to distinguish it from other approaches or other ways of using or other objectives in terms of using environmental and social information in an investment process. And this was the reference point that we used to then ask, what would these look like when you start to match them with the distinctive characteristics of a listed equities asset class? I won't go into details about the working group process. If people are interested in that, there's a little bit more information about that on the guidance. What I would just highlight out of it for purposes of today is that it involved about 100 of our members over a period of a couple of years. And it started with basically three phases. One, where we simply tried to look at what was available in the market that was identifying itself as an impact product and ask managers what they did, and more importantly, what they thought they did that was different from past sustainable investment products that made this an impact strategy and other things something else. You reflected on how that related to the core characteristics, and then moved to developing the guidance document that was intended to try to match some combination of what people do today, but more importantly, what they could be doing tomorrow in terms of better applying an impact mentality and set of practices to this asset class. So moving into the guidance, maybe a couple things that are important to understand in terms of our orientation. First, we were not trying to make a judgment about better or worse. We have not approached this with the idea of we're defining an impact guidance on how to create an impact product that is inherently better than an ESG product or is the stage that all investing will ultimately reach. We're recognizing that there are different motivations or different reasons by which people will choose to bring environmental and social information into an investment process. If we look at the labels, it's quite confusing. People talk about impact, they talk about ESG, sustainable. and they use these terms in interchangeable ways, and often three investors, if you ask them what does ESG mean, will give you three different answers. If you take a step beyond that, though, and try to ask, forget about the labels, what's the motivation, what's the objective you're trying to pursue with an approach to using environmental and social information, then you can start to get something that looks more like a sort of a consensus or some common ways of describing the purpose that might motivate an investor. So perhaps the investor is just trying to manage risk. Perhaps the investor sees that there's an opportunity for long-term outperformance by investing into themes of the future, or they're thinking about a portfolio that will be resilient into the future. Perhaps they want a particular overweight exposure to specific trends. Maybe they're interested in aligning with their values, or in our case, the way we're thinking about it, maybe they're interested in aligning their capital with a particular transition and in a way that will help accelerate a particular transition. These are all different purposes to which you can try to design a sustainable, design an investment strategy. And our objective was not to try to argue that one is better than another, but to help the market differentiate particular purposes for tools and to recognize and be able to differentiate what you might expect when you have a particular objective of an investment strategy that will help you align your capital with a particular transition and accelerate it. You can try to have a positive and intentional impact. Second, as we were doing this work, we found it was important to try to make a distinction between investing that is impactful and impact investing. And what I mean by that is if you think about investing in listed equities for by some measures, 50 years, investors in the listed equity asset class have been taking a thoughtful approach to reflecting on environmental and social issues and engaging with companies in ways that made a difference. So you can say it's investing that has mattered and has been impactful. That is quite different, though, from investing impact investing, where we think of it as an investment strategy that is designed specifically to deliver on an impact objective. And the way I would explain this difference is if you think about a company like Walmart. I come from the US and I was, at one point in time, was following the investor engagement with Walmart reasonably carefully. And in my point of view, there was a point in time when Walmart as a company was quite hostile to any discussion around environmental or social issues. There was a sustained effort by lots of different stakeholders, but in particular by investors, to try to engage the company and try to motivate a different point of view. And at a certain point in time, there was a breakthrough, and Walmart took on a very different perspective on environmental and then later labor issues, and moved very quickly from being a company that was hostile to discussion on those topics to one of the most powerful advocates and driver for environmental standards in their supply chains and later labor standards. Now, that engagement, as far as I could see, made a difference. However, for virtually all of the investors that were an essential part of that engagement, I don't think any of them invested into Walmart because they had the intention at the point of making the investment to try to change Walmart. At that point in time, if you wanted to have a listed equities portfolio, Walmart was one of the companies that you simply had to have in it. And so it was a part of a portfolio, and they were looking for ways to engage it. So that was an example of investing that made a difference. It was impactful, but it's quite different from, say, an investment strategy that starts off by saying, we want to change the working conditions for the largest number of workers on the face of the planet as possible. To do that, we are going to assemble a portfolio of companies that have the largest labor forces in the world and have the longest supply chain reach and the greatest ability to influence the working conditions in the factory floors around the world, and can reach the greatest number of workers through the decisions that they make about their product and about their supply chains. And we will then systematically engage with those companies on a program of improving workers' lives. Those are two very different things, even though both of them can be arguably make a difference in the world. So if you were to take away only 2 points in terms of key messages about our guidance, I'll touch on those, and then I'll very quickly move through the guidance itself. And then we can move on to the other speakers in a discussion. So first and foremost, when we began the work, we thought we might be able to identify a couple things that you could point to and say that would make something an impact fund. So if you use these types of indicators, that's an impact fund. If you pursue engagement in a certain way, that would make it an impact fund. And every time we would try, as a working group, would try to identify something, they would always say, well, does that make it impact? And kind of depends. What does it depend on? Well, it depends on what the strategy is and what the investor is actually trying to do. And so the single most important thing that the working group ended up focusing on as the defining feature of an impact fund in listed equities is the clarity of the investment strategy in terms of what it seeks to achieve on an impact basis. So if you think about the typical sustainable equity strategy, it might say something like, we invest into companies that offer a competitive return or an attractive financial return and contribute to the sustainable development goals, or will contribute to improved quality of life, or are aligned to universal human rights, or something very broad. So impact funds are ones that in their strategy statement, they're much clearer about what change they hope to achieve, and clear enough to the point that the fund manager can develop a theory of change. And the theory of change, it's a fancy word basically for a thesis of how the economy will move from A to B. What needs to happen in order to move to a low carbon economy? What needs to happen about what needs to happen in order to reduce structural inequalities in our economy? And that theory of change becomes the anchor for the rest of an investment process and the building blocks around that. Because with the theory of change and with a clear strategy, you're able to, number one, lay out impact priorities by being able to articulate the particular challenges that you hope to address or the particular outcomes you hope to facilitate. And a theory of change then helps you start to come up with a thesis that helps refine or define an investable universe, or what makes an attractive investment opportunity in order to structure a portfolio. It also offers the opportunity to reflect on what's the particular contribution that I, as the fund manager or the investor, hope to make in that process. And that sum total of things is in effect what provides you a theory of change. The second thing that was important was everybody, consistently within the working group, people agreed that owning companies that have positive attributes, whether it's their product and service or their ability to align with an SDG in some form, is important, but that on its own is not sufficient to call something an impact fund. There also needs to be an active element of investor contribution. Now, the working group was not able to agree on what exactly constitutes an appropriate level of engagement, or what are the circumstances under which market effects are compelling or persuasive. However, they were able to agree that the components or the elements that make up investor contribution are either around new capital. It's not the most common, it's not as common in private markets, but in public markets, it still are opportunities to provide new capital to companies, either through IPOs, or sometimes younger companies will still go to the market for secondary offerings even after they're listed. Second way is through engagement with companies. I think that's probably something most people are familiar with, so I won't speak to that. And then the third was through the market effect of the pattern of ownership. This is something which people debated quite a bit. I think in the case of looking at a company like Apple, it's pretty hard to argue that any individual investor's ownership makes a difference, and the pattern of holding of the stock makes a difference for the share price or the attention that Apple gets from other investors, and therefore allows it to do secondary capital market operations or undertake other things that taking advantage of their share value that allow them to enhance their financial position or the resources available to them. However, if you were to think about it as a counterexample or a contrast, investing into a small cap company in a fairly illiquid market, you might be able to make an argument that under some circumstances, a patient investor, particularly during a volatile market period, might make a difference that is noticeable to a company in a small cap company in an illiquid market. So as I said, the working group didn't come to a conclusion on exactly when is there a strong case and when there's not, but they did agree that these are the elements in the vocabulary that should be the focus of a dialogue between owners and managers about whether or not there is a credible argument and representation of contribution being made. Now, moving very quickly, since I do want to try to keep to about 20 minutes, just through the substance of the guidance. When you look at the document, we organize the guidance around these 4 steps in an investment process. There are different ways you could describe a process. These just seem to be a simple way that was widely understandable to people about setting a strategy or developing a strategy, the initial portfolio composition, the subsequent engagement, and then ultimately the performance evaluation of the portfolio. So when you look in the guidance, what you'll see is what I call the blue zone. It's a highlighted box, I believe it's blue, which states a sort of simple statement or definition of a practice that one might expect to see. And we were intentionally trying to write this in a way that could be used almost like a due diligence document to support a discussion or a dialogue between owners and managers to help them come to a conclusion about to what degree they felt the fund or the manager was demonstrating strong impact practices. And so on the left side of my slide, you'll see the guidance or the criteria that we describe and is laid out in the document. And then there's subsequent discussion about different ways in which managers might approach trying to achieve that. So as I said, in terms of the fund strategy, the main things that we emphasized within that was the clarity of focus in the strategy and the fact that that commitment or the statement around what the intended impact objective is actually placed into the documents that govern the fund. It's in the prospectus or whatever the equivalent document would be. That's a sort of binding representation of what the fund is proposing to do with the capital provided. We also felt that it was important that that statement of objective is backed by enough analysis and is specific enough that the managers can develop a thesis or a theory of change. That's something which should be documented in a way that can be shared and communicated, but might not belong in the legal and statutory documents that funds use. In the case of the portfolio design and selection, the portfolio design and then subsequent management, there are basically 2 things that we were trying to emphasize with the points that you see on the left. The first, the working group felt that all of the holdings within the portfolio needed to have a relationship to the fund's objective, and thereby also, by extension, they should have a relationship or a relevance to the theory of change that is guiding the fund's thinking around its impact objectives. And that all of the companies needed to have some substantive degree of commitment or relationship, or that the impact activities or the relevant activities of the business needed to be sufficiently material to the overall investment or the overall business, that it crossed a threshold that made them relevant to the investment portfolio. There are different ways in which we see investors go about trying to assess that degree of materiality. Some look at things like the revenues, some look at the product portfolio, some look at the company statement about purpose and vision, different ways for doing that. What's important is that there is some replicated and systematic measure for assessing the fit of companies with that impact strategy and the theory of change, or the impact objectives and theory of change. The other point that we made was that one would reasonably expect the holding period and the pattern of holding in an impact fund to be connected to and reflective of the expectations that the investor contribution has, and then also that would have some relationship to the performance against the impact thesis and the impact objectives. We weren't able to come up with any kind of an absolute rule of thumb, and clearly holding periods are influenced by the need to redeem, to sell shares in order to fund redemptions or people that are exiting the fund. Fund managers need to have the flexibility to be able to lock in gains, but you would expect over a period of time that the management and the choices that are made around holding period need to be done in a way that allow the fund to achieve its impact objectives. In terms of engagement, we did not come up with a particularly, we didn't see engagement as being something fundamentally different. In practice, what we saw was more likely you would expect an impact fund would use engagement differently. It would most likely focus its engagement around the priorities that are stated as a fund objective. So if it's a low carbon transition fund, you would expect most of the engagement would be climate related. It might also engage in some other sort of general good practice governance issues, but you would expect the bulk of the engagement would be focused around the stated objective of the fund, and that engagement would be evaluated in relation to those goals that the fund has stated that it's working towards. You would also expect that the progress in engagement would be an influencing factor in holding periods, because it's quite hard to argue that you are having an investor contribution through your market effects or through your engagement if you're turning over your portfolio or turning over your holdings every 6 months. And then lastly, in closing on the performance data, when we started, we heard a lot of feedback from managers saying that they found it difficult to evaluate impact performance if they felt they were lacking data. When we tried asking what kind of information did they need, we didn't actually hear a lot of very specific ideas. And so we came to the conclusion that it's less about seeking an entirely new set of data in impact, and more a different way of analyzing and making use of the kind of data that is available about listed companies. So in particular, what we saw as the best practices that impact managers were doing was taking the kind of output data that is typically used across all types of sustainable investing, but finding ways to try to analyze it in relation to the outcomes that were the focus of the fund, and trying to transpose or come up with ways of analyzing or assessing correlation, and using that as the reference point for trying to assess and evaluate their satisfaction with the performance of companies. It also meant anchoring that analysis more in looking at company performance in relation to real world outcomes, and less focus on relative performance to peers. So if you think about the typical best-in-class approach, you might look at a company across anywhere from a dozen to 50 different type of criteria and evaluate peer performance, and then try to find the companies that are the best 10% or 20% within their class. Impact funds would reasonably be expected to focus less on who is the best amongst peers and more on who has the greatest absolute contribution to the outcomes of interest to us, based on our analysis and our ability to identify a connection between the outputs of companies and the outcomes that we care about. So that's a quick walk through the guidance that we've developed through the working group. In the interest of time, I'll stop there, and I look forward to the opportunity to hear thoughts from other panelists in the discussion to follow.
Thank you so much, Sean. I think we all need time to digest all this future different horizons that we do have when reflecting about impact investing strategies in listed equities. I cannot help but asking, since we are going through this cutting edge content, just making a quick question from my side on additionality, because there's been a lot of back and forth on which additionality notion is more applicable for listed equities. There's, I've heard many on underserved population or needs, on going beyond to what's inherent to economic activity, or just supplying additional capital. So is there any of the many interpretations that we've heard that it's more suited under the umbrella for listed equities on your view?
Yeah, from the GIIN's perspective, we tend not to use the term additionality because that it has a specific background out of development finance, and often people describe it as investments that sorry, it's getting late at night in Tokyo, but it's a complicated grammar. Investments that allow companies to achieve outcomes that would otherwise not have happened, which from a technical analysis perspective is quite a complicated thing to ask and to do with integrity across every investment, across every asset class, and across markets. The question of, has what you've done made a difference? That's a very legitimate question, and it's quite central in terms of impact. So we tend to focus more on terms of thinking of, number one, what's the contribution the investor expects to have? Second, how can they express that, and then try to document whether or not they think that has occurred, and use that as the lens for trying to assess, number one, whether or not you're satisfied with the sort of the role of the investor, and then number two, particularly when you combine that with a theory of change, and the more clarity about the impact objective, to be able to draw some conclusions about, is this addressing a critical need, or is this addressing something which is a pressing problem or somehow urgent, or is this simply sort of investing into things that are generally and generically good? I'd say as well, it's important also, I think, to recognize and be direct that the kind of contribution that investors can make is different across asset classes. And I think a lot of the skepticism about listed equities over the years has been because in private markets, people can directly add capital. And it's very easy to say, because there's more money, more things can happen. And, it's also important to say that recognizes differences in what can be achieved. But at the same time, if we want to try to have companies that have investors that value them in similar ways and approach similar kinds of analysis, you need to be able to replicate those practices across asset classes and recognize that you'll just simply have different sorts of contributions as you move along the chain of assets.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your answer here. Since the timing is tight, and I don't want to steal any more time from you myself, just for the sake of housekeeping, we can get questions from the audience in the Q&A section within the Zoom tool, and I will make sure that both Sean and Agustin get it timely. And if we cannot make it within the environment of this webinar, we'll make sure to send it to everyone by written so that we have the chance to answer properly. Thank you again, Sean. I really enjoyed it. And now it's the turn for me to introduce Agustin Vitorica, which will be moderating the panel. Agustin is one of the key pieces for impact investing in Spain, not only because of his regular job, but he also makes sure to make lots of connections in between also other key actors. He's a member of the executive committee of SpainNAB, and he also has been coordinating the expert group on impact investing in Spainsif. And on top of that, he's also participated into the GIIN working group for listed equities. So there is absolutely nobody more capable of moderating this discussion here below. So Agustin, whenever you feel ready, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much, Andrea, for that embarrassing introduction for me. And thanks very much as well to Spainsif and SpainNAB for giving me the opportunity to be the panelist with these amazing participants that we have, which I'm going to introduce right now. With me, I have Caroline Brady, who has already turned on the camera. She's Director of Impact Management and Research in Fundamental Equities at BlackRock. I have Ingrid Kukuljan, who is Head of Impact and Sustainable Investing at Federated Hermes. And I have Dennis Bass, who is Lead of Sustainable Strategies at Allianz Global Investor. Before I give you all the opportunity to introduce a little bit yourselves and the angle that your organizations have with impact investing, I want to mention a few things that Sean said about the guidelines, which I had the privilege of being part of the working group, and we also have the privilege of being part of the Impact Council of the GIIN. Sean mentioned that listed equities is the largest asset class, and as we know, especially for institutional investors, private equity investments or alternative investments still represent quite a small portion of the portfolio of institutional investors, around 5% in average worldwide. So if we really want to bring this industry from the trillions to the many trillions, or from the billions to the trillions, we need listed funds that are considered impact investing. And as Sean said, it's very important for, as portfolio moves to 100% impact, I mean, you couldn't do that if you don't include listed equities. Just in terms of also family offices and other players that are thinking or starting to move towards 100% impact holdings, you need to have listed equities over there if you want to make a full portfolio. And also, I like very much what Sean mentioned, that this is not about a better or a worse approach towards investment. All investment strategies, ranging from responsible investments up to impact investing, are very important to achieve the big and to fight against the biggest challenges that the world is facing, both from a societal or environmental approach. And I think that in the impact investing industry where we operate as GAWA Capital, we know that to be an impact investor, first you need to be a good ESG investor. And of course, you need to have also your exclusion list and be a responsible investor. So this is not that impact is better than the rest of the strategies, and all strategies combine and are essential to achieve really a better planet or a better society. And finally, just to mention what Sean also said, is that we're not saying here that sustainable investments or responsible investments have no impact. I mean, all of those strategies do have an impact, but the guidelines are throwing light to what is really impact investing in listed equities. But this is not saying that the other strategies don't have an impact, because they do have an impact as well. So I want to finalize this introduction by saying that I think that the guidelines that were produced are quite demanding and inspirational, and of course we're not expecting all asset managers today to comply with all those criteria. And I think, as the GIIN mentions in the guidelines, this is done to help asset managers to understand what will be the expectations of investors to consider that fund, a specific fund, as impact investing. And also the guidelines will help the investors themselves to distinguish, between impact investing in listed equities and other listed equities strategies which are not impact investing. With that, I will leave the panelists to a brief presentation of their organizations and their current strategies regarding impact investing. And Ingrid, over to you.
Thank you, Agustin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ingrid Kukuljan, Sustainable Investing at Federated Hermes. We are known as the leader in responsible investing, with a track record going back more than 30 years. We also launched one of the first impact funds in the public equity space, which was 5 years ago. We consider ourselves to be a pure impact fund, and we have set a very high bar for what we consider to be an impactful company. As Sean probably knows, we go well beyond all of the guidelines that were set by GIIN, and to that end, we have established a proprietary impact database. We have 3 years of data now, And we use this database the same way that we look at the financial accounts. We are also transferring this database to the rest of the teams within our company. In addition to this, we are one of the global leaders in engagement with 1.4 trillion of assets, and we engage very heavily with our holdings. And with regards to the impact product, the whole point is to accelerate the positive change.
Oh, thanks very much, Ingrid. Impressive figures that you mentioned, and we will go deep in some of the questions of the guidelines and how do you implement those questions in your strategies. And Dennis, over to you.
Thank you, Agustin. And yeah, thanks for having me. That was a very insightful discussion and statements as well from Sean. So my name is Dennis Baas. I'm a member of Allianz GI's Sustainable and Impact Investing team embedded in our global global investment platform at Allianz Global Investors. My role is, amongst others, shaping our sustainable and impact product suite. So we are having close to 200 sustainable mutual funds distributed not only across Europe, but as well Asia. One of our key focus, obviously, is as well to increase continuously our sustainable strategies, making them available not only to retail clients, but as well to institutional clients. And we believe when it comes to impact investing, that this is foremost due to the fact that direct measurability is one of the key elements, and as well to establish a clear causality between investment and impact, that this is still more for us, more a topic on the private market side. So the impact strategies that we run are, and that we classify as impact, are on the private market side, private equity, private debt. However, we have as well a product suite of SDG aligned equity strategies, where basically you invest in impactful companies, right? Product companies that produce products and services contributing to environmental and social outcomes.
Excellent. It's going to be great to have your views as well, considering that you're currently pursuing impact investing through private markets. And as you say, causality and contribution are key points of this discussion, as Sean already mentioned. And we will circle around that to see, you know, what kind of, I don't like the word very much, but it doesn't come an alternative word to my mind. I mean, that kind of attribution or yes, or causality itself, as you say, you know, how, I mean, that's very clear in private equity markets, where it's not only money, but sometimes it's even technical assistance, you know, that really delivers the outcomes. And in this case, in listed equities, it's clearly that these instruments are not available because it's a different asset class. So we will start with the first theme on the guidelines, which is setting the fund or portfolio impact strategy. And as Sean mentioned, the first expectation of the guidelines is that the fund prospectus or other key documents should state the intended real-world impact of the investment strategy supported by a theory of change. So the question for the panel, the first question will be, do your current impact funds, and this is more for Caroline and Ingrid, include the statement of the problem that you're trying to solve and a theory of change? And if not, I mean, what do you think about the guidelines in this sense and your ability to describe a theory of change? That, I mean, my understanding of the guidelines was that it should be a theory of change for the whole fund and not individually for each investment. But it's open to any of you to answer.
Yeah, in our prospectus, we state very clearly that we are looking to achieve positive change and that we are also measuring the extent of that change. We have focused on 9 themes that we have derived from analyzing 169 targets of the UN SDGs. And in the prospectus, we state very clearly which societal environmental challenges we are trying to resolve. And to that end, we are also in our impact database calculating the net impacts of each one of our holdings. And we believe it's important that you look at both operations and solutions and not only putting a target on the revenues, because both are important and you have to net them off.
I see. And in those themes that you have defined for your fund, I mean, do you have like a theory of change as well? You know, kind of input, output, outcomes?
Yeah. And in the impact database, we also calculated something that we call the second derivative. So we went very, very deeply into our calculations. It's very detailed, taking in terms of the theory of change, you know, not only the direct positive impacts of the holdings, but also, for instance, when it comes to medical companies, you know, the savings that could additionally be applied to the whole of the healthcare system. So it's very detailed in terms of theory of change.
Got it. Thanks. And then, I mean, from your experience in your exposure to impact investing in private equity or private markets, I mean, what are you getting in terms of theory of change, and if you have any thoughts of how that differentiates between you know, this theory of change and in listed equities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's clear that a prospectus is basically it's the document where you need to be transparent about your investment objective and as well what you want to achieve. Not only what you want to achieve, but as well how you want to achieve it. Do I think that this is the right document to inform investors? I don't think so, because prospectus language is in the end is legal documents, right? So it's sometimes not that straightforward for a, let's say, normal person in the streets to understand that. So I would definitely say, yeah, it's important to be transparent and clear in the prospectus, but then you need additional material, marketing presentation, really to outline based on examples, based on quantitative and qualitative assessments, what you want to achieve. And we, for example, we have a impact measurement framework established where we really then as well refer to the 5 dimensions of impact, of course, and the as well theory of change, to what, the how, and so on. And I think that's really something you need to present as well to clients to make sure that the impact that can be achieved via the product is tangible.
And then a follow-up question on that. I mean, do any of you, Caroline or Ingrid, do use the 5 dimensions of impact in that theory of change?
The first step for us is if we see that we can't quantify the impact, we wouldn't even consider the company.
Okay, so we can agree basically, you know, between the 3 of you that the theory of change, the 5 dimensions of impact, and the you know, and the specific impact objective is something that has to be in the company legal documents or other documentation. So that's there. Then let's move maybe to the second guideline, which might be trickier, which is the portfolio design and selection, because there the guideline says, you know, that the expectation, as Sean mentioned, is that any stock that goes into the portfolio must have an alignment, clear alignment, direct alignment with the fund theory of change and impact goal, and that also the holding period of that stock has to be related to their impact goal, and there has to be some clear contribution from having that stock in the portfolio towards the impact goal. I mean, the way I see it, and this is my personal opinion, is that as Sean said, I mean, it's not about rotating the portfolio every 6 months, but really holding the stock till the change that the fund is looking for may really be challenging from the financial return of the fund itself. You know, if we buy and hold the stocks until the specific impact goals have been achieved, then that might really go against the financial return of the fund, which is something that no investor will be willing to look at. As in the impact investing industry, we tend to defend that we can all get a risk-adjusted market return. So what are your views in with respect to this? Ingrid, maybe let's start with you.
Sure. So if you look at our investment process, we are looking to resolve world's critical needs, as I mentioned earlier, be it of the environment or the society. By the very nature of that, our businesses are exposed to scalable and secular demand drivers, and usually to very large TAM. If you look at the fund over 5 years, so for instance, we don't invest in big tech, we have a huge underweight to financials. We don't invest in energy at all. I mean, fossil fuels, obviously we invest in renewable energy. And our returns, if you exclude this dominance of the big tech over the last year, are in line with the index. And the reason for that is the very nature of the businesses. So we have not been exposed to 3 of the best performing sectors, yet our returns are in line with the index. Second thing to that point is when we look at the business, we usually think on a 5-year horizon. Is this a business that we want to own on a 5-year horizon? And that plays into our impact database, which we are tracking like financial returns. And the key to that database is to demonstrate positive delta in terms of the net impact generated by company. So we have full accountability and traceability for the investments. And given the nature of the business, A, we look at the long-term horizon, given the needs that are being resolved, and B, the positive impact that comes with that.
I see. So, so if you hold a stock for, I mean, the objective of having it in the portfolio for 5 years, and I mean, and what happens if in the middle of the investment that delta is not happening? Will you sell that stock, or the opposite? You know, if after 5 years the targets haven't been met, I mean, do you think it's feasible for a listed equity fund to hold the stock further, you know, until the impact goals are achieved? So
we would engage with the company. So far, we have 3 years of data, and we had positive impact across all of our 23 KPIs. So we are very happy about that. So we haven't had a situation so far where it has not been achieved. But first, we would look to engage before we will divest.
Okay, no, great, thanks. And Dennis, in your views, for an impact fund, how should the portfolio design be different from a sustainable fund? You know, what kind of difference can you tell that you know that we clearly differentiate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is basically what we call the ESG footprint that is optimized for a sustainable fund, right? You invest in companies that exhibit, for example, via a best-in-class approach, better environmental standards or social, like the way how they treat their employees or governance standards. So that's what we would, what is typically seen as a sustainable investment approach. Whereas on the impact side, you go a step further. You look at the handprint. That's a bit the way how we call it. So it's basically looking at the products and services that a company produces. And basically what your goal is that you optimize your portfolio towards those companies that basically have the highest and the purest handprint when it comes to contribution then to sustainable or impactful outcomes. And I mean, I always use this example, like if you are a company that is producing paper bags, right? That's not a product that is very sustainable. Let's say it's neutral, but you can be a company that you produce it according to the highest environmental standards. You treat your employees very good, low incident accidents and so on, and you have like a audit committee that is leading and so on. Such a company could end up in a sustainable fund, but most likely not in an impact strategy.
Right. Yeah, that resonates very much with the recent consultation of the FCA sustainable labels. I mean, the difference between sustainable improvers, which I mean through engagement they improve ESG factors of the companies, which is great. And sustainable impact, where it has to be an additional contribution and a step further, really to consider that sustainable impact. In terms of contribution that Sean mentioned, contribution can come as new capital. I don't know, maybe in companies, in public companies, or private companies that are going public, where they need an initial anchor investor, can come as providing stability, that stability to the stock price of that company while you're holding that stock, or to the engagement. Which of these three contributions do you use? I would like to start with either Caroline or Ingrid in this sense. I mean, is it only engagement, or are you using any of those two additional contributors?
We use both. So in terms of the engagement, we use it to accelerate the creation of positive impact. And we believe to the whole argument that Sean was talking about earlier on, in order to scale impact, we see ourselves as the providers of permanent capital to impactful businesses, which they cannot get in the private markets and they cannot scale up. And we actually have some examples in the portfolio where we had initially provided private capital. Companies have done an IPO, and a particular company that we own has grown their revenues from 80 million 10 years ago to 3 billion last year. And vast majority of that is because of the fact that they have become a public company.
See, and you became the anchor investor of that company. You continue to be the anchor investor when you went to the IPO.
Well, not anymore, given the market cap. No, but we were. Yeah.
But you were for it's not that you sold at the IPO, is that you maintained that stake for a number of years.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And Dennis, given that your experience in sustainable investments, what do you how should the engagement of a sustainable fund, how can it be different from the engagement in an impact fund? In your view, what would be the differences?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to highlight, as an active manager, of course, engagement, active stewardship is something that is really important for us. So if you would have asked me the previous question, I would have said that engagement is really the key, and rather more than support of a share price, because as an active manager, you want to be able as well to sell a stock when for example, the impact is achieved, and then you want to get rid of it. When you say now, what is the difference between engagement for a sustainable fund and for an impact fund? I would like to just bring up a little example that basically for the sustainable fund, the engagement is more around the improvement of the ESG footprint. right? You basically, for example, you support a shareholder resolution to assess whether a company respects, for example, the right to build a workers' council, something like that. And you go public on that. And with that, you can increase as well the pressure for the company to look into that and maybe to change. When it comes to impact funds, it's again more looking at the products and services. For example, if you think about a car manufacturer company, you want to maybe talk with them about how they can increase the number of electric vehicles they offer. So it's like more that perspective that you take on the engagement side when it comes to impact strategies and so on.
100% in agreement with you. Very interesting what you mentioned about bringing a sector together to solve specific challenges for the sector as a whole. That reminds me kind of the cross-cutting and knowledge-sharing projects in technical assistance for private equity funds. I wonder if that's possible for, or if that is possible because of BlackRock's size and maybe might not be possible for other smaller asset managers. But you touched on the last topic, and then with this we will open up the panel for questions from the audience. But I mean, what impact metrics are you using? And you said that you are using the IRIS Plus metrics, which I personally believe is important because the GIIN is making a big effort now with the impact performance benchmarks to have comparability between different impact funds. So what are the metrics that you are using, Ingrid, in your funds?
Oh, here we go. Apologies. So we have 23 KPIs, and we analyze it both from the operations and the solutions end. Obviously, the operation end is the same for all the companies, and the solutions are company specific, and they range from, so for instance, on operations end, the water usage, climate change, deforestation, waste management, and then on the solutions, depending on the company, it's number of patients treated, number of people financially included. So it depends on the company, but on the operations side, they all tend to be the same, and we have 23 of those. And obviously, if we invest in a new business and the KPI is not represented, we would look to increase the KPI for this specific company.
And do you establish like a baseline when at the beginning of investment to measure the outcome?
We do. So we use the base year of the investment as our baseline, and we look for positive delta from that year.
And your metrics are aligned with any of the, standards out there, like the IRIS Plus metrics? Or?
Yes, with the IRIS Plus.
IRIS Plus as well. Okay. And Dennis, in your case, how different are the outcome metrics that you're getting from the private equity impact funds compared to those sustainable funds?
Generally, of course, data availability is always a big topic, right, when it comes to sustainable and impact investing generally. And we see over the years improvements. So both on the public side, companies are reporting more. There are the different ESG data providers where we basically have a broad set of data sets onboarded, and we have a dedicated as well platform internally. It's our sustainability insights engine, where it's all combined on a company level, really the different perspectives. So not only footprint level data, but then as well looking into, for example, if you think about the sustainable investment share from SFDR, so from regulatory perspectives, this is included as well. And of course, the advantage on the private market side is that you can more directly interact with the investee target, and then you can define a specific set of KPIs and get then the respective data points so that you can track those KPIs over time. And that's what we do. So we monitor them and look whether there is improvement over time. And if not, then we engage with the company and talk to them. And yeah, by that, I think the looking ahead, I think it's getting better every year. So that's the good evolution. And with that, I think as well, impact reporting towards end clients will improve as well over time.
Very much agree with you. One final question that comes to my mind is, which is starting to be a common practice among private equity managers, is to link management fees to the impact achieved. Do any of your funds, Caroline or Ingrid, have the management fees tied to impact achieved?
Unfortunately not, but I think it would be much more suitable to have that than to be benchmarked to MSCI All World, because, for instance, we don't invest in about 90% of the index because we can't prove the intentionality and additionality of the businesses.
I'm thinking aloud. I mean, and of course, it's logical that you have your benchmark is an index like the MSCI World or whatever. But once the impact benchmark are completely, are completed by the GIIN, by the IRIS Plus, maybe the performance could be linked to both a financial index and the impact performance index as well. And maybe in that sense, that will open up the opportunity to link management fees also to that impact. Yes. Okay, no, thanks very much to the three of you. Let's open up the questions to the audience. I think, Andrea, you can lead us on that.
Yeah, well, for the sake of time, I'll make a selection. There's one that is really interesting. I think for the other ones we can do it written, but there's one here. They write from a small company that was created as a joint venture in between a real estate investment trust fund and an NGO. And what they do is that they're providing affordable rental houses to NGO and entities that provide social impact. So, but as a real estate investment trust, they have to be listed, although they are very small. So they are asking on the panelists' views on whether there is a general avoidance on investing in small listed companies, or what is the state of the art in the small listed companies, because they do exist as well.
Who wants to take that question?
I'm happy to take the question. So for us, this is from the risk management perspective. The rule of thumb is that the daily liquidity needs to be equivalent to 1% of our NAV. And given that we run almost $1 billion, that prevents a number of smaller businesses being included as such, even though we will include in businesses where we find that they have a tremendous positive impact.
Excellent. Are there any other questions, Andrea?
I do have another one that maybe, Agustin, you would also like to answer. It has to do, and that will be the last one from my side. It's about, and I will make it shorter than what is written. So my apologies if some relevant information is lost in translation. But given these industries that have been getting more and more attention because they are more and more profitable, as renewable energies, for instance, are there any mechanisms to identify that those industries, even though they are really impactful and in the ESG space, they are on the top 5 or top 2? Are there any mechanisms from the impact investing industry to select or to identify whether those activities might not be undersupplied in a way because they are getting all the attention by the regular functioning of the market, so that we can focus on different ones?
Yeah. Well, if any of the panelists, I don't know whether that's possible to direct that funding from the listed equity funds. my view is that that's more to be tackled probably by the private equity funds, you know, and maybe, you know, because sometimes, you know, the small actions in those underserved sectors really unleash a lot of impact in the long run. And I think blended finance in that sense for private equity allows for that, you know, so that you can accommodate large private institutional investors in the senior side, and maybe more philanthropic or public investors in the concessional side. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong in what I'm saying in any of the three panelists, but I think that question should be tackled more from the private equity side.
Yeah, basically, I mean, that's absolutely true, that obviously impact or respective importance of different aspects change over time, right? If we think about the COVID pandemic, then obviously you would like to have be invested in Moderna and BioNTech producing directly vaccines that tackle our current problem. But if you think nowadays, with COVID being more or less business as usual, of course the impact has in a way vanished of these companies. And I think in that context it's maybe seen in the same way for different aspects. So I mean, renewable energy is of course something that is and remains important over time, and but of course, energy prices fluctuate dependent on external effects and so on. So that makes it sometimes more attractive and sometimes a bit less attractive from a financial perspective.
I agree. Thanks very much. So with this, we close the webinar. Dennis, Caroline, Ingrid, it's been a privilege to have you and to speak about the guidelines. I think the conclusion is that, I mean, as we said at the beginning, the guidelines are quite demanding, but from the conversation, it looks like at least part of those are already being implemented, and we're seeing, or it's possible to see listed equity impact funds that are going this step further that Dennis was mentioning during the webinar. Sean, it's been a privilege to have you, and thanks very much for the clear explanation of the guidelines. I do recommend all the audience to download the guidelines as they are publicly available and read through them, as I think it's a great piece of work that the GIIN deliver.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much to all of you.
Everyone. Good day. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.